Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone's having a great day. Today's video is going to be revolving around the most recent patch. I'm going to just briefly review some of the changes they made and what I liked. And then I'm going to be going over 3 legendary heroes that I believe could use a buff. One of the best parts about this game is the fact that epics are extremely usable, especially for free-to-play players, and you get an epic every 20 summons, which helps people progress in all sorts of dungeons and different areas of content, which is helpful, but I think for someone to be a legendary and given the cost it takes to max their abilities, some of them need to be brought up to scale. So very quickly, I'm just going to go over some of the changes that I liked from the patch they made 5 days ago on March 2nd. So Evelyn First Dawn, as opposed to dealing defense down for 2 turns and ending the turn, she also launches a joint attack with an ally, which is cool. They added a little more damage percentage to Brand the Brilliant, who I have. He did hit a little weak, so I think this was good. I do also have Godfrey, and this makes him much more usable, especially in Arena, where he's a really good brand counter. His ability to silence somebody is really good. I know Virgil also does the silence, but Godfrey with a silence and his trait, which extends the ultimate ability cooldowns, is pretty powerful in Arena. Good to see Balberith get a little bit of increased health after revival. It was a little too low. I really like what they did with Tia. The guaranteed freeze on the main target and extra damage makes her, again, in the arena, instead of it being chance or something that you needed to build over multiple turns to freeze the opponent, you're going to be able to freeze at least one immediately, which is good. Lydia, I have her. I haven't built her out. I know she's fairly controversial because there's not really much information on dodge. I will say, I'm sure everyone has had to face her in the Void Tower, and maybe you lost 1 or 2 times because she dodged almost every attack, which can be pretty frustrating, and I wouldn't be surprised if down the line she became someone used often in Arena. Yolanda, I really like this change as well. She paled in comparison to other support slash shield or healer champions, but I think giving her the bonus turn, or giving the ally the bonus turn, and then applying immune and attack up 2 together makes her much more usable. As for the rest, I'm just going to save time and say that they really did a good job balancing and making some of these epics even more powerful. As I was saying, it's great that free-to-play players can use epics in a lot of different content to help them progress. And it's also encouraging. Some of these changes occurred because there was a Discord challenge that allowed people to suggest changes. And to see a gacha game company taking input from its players and actually implementing them is extremely encouraging. Now that we've kind of briefly reviewed some of the changes that I liked from the patch, let's get into the 3 legendary heroes that I think need a buff. Now that I've briefly gone over the patch notes, I'm going to get into the 3 legendary heroes that I believe could use a buff. As you can see, I'm only missing 4 heroes, all of which are legendary. So I don't know exactly the utility of Goobeg. I know Corrupt Auroch is good. I wish they would slide me one of him for all the summons I've pulled. Darken Niklaus, and of course Evelyn First Dawn. So if you were hoping to see one of them, I don't have experience with them, so I can't really speak to them. But the first one that I'm going to talk about is Mulhex. I pulled him recently and built him out. I don't really see where I would choose him over certain other characters. So his cooldown, once you get the abilities, 7 turn, deals 200% damage and applies defense down for 2 turns to 1 enemy. Grants attack up to all team members for 2 turns. And basically the way he's synergizing with his trait is that any attack by an ally affected by attack up against an enemy reduces this character's ability cooldowns by 1 turn. And his special attack deals 100% damage to all enemies. If this character has attack up, launches a bonus attack. I understand what they're trying to do here, and then obviously his basic deals 100% damage to an enemy, 30% chance to apply defense down. I understand the idea. He's essentially someone who's always going to be putting attack up on your team and hopefully always placing defense down on the other team. The issue to me comes with not only this cooldown time, it's just the strength in general. His ultimate doing 200% damage isn't unheard of, and then he applies defense down, but only to one enemy, and then he's granting attack up 1 for 2 turns. So I'm already thinking of multiple heroes that are doing things better. He does do a little bit more damage than some of those, but I think he needs to pick a role. If he's going to be support, I think the support needs to be stronger, and if he's going to be doing more damage, then he needs to be able to give himself more attack. So an example of a character that I would choose over a Mulhex every time, pretty much. Blue affinity as well would be an epic William. Not only is he much cheaper to upgrade, much easier to get, much easier to ascend, he's already adding damage to your team, your basic attack, by 60%. And similarly, he's able to drop defense for 2 turns. The difference is he's doing it AoE. And he's also placing those counterattacks and a defense up 2 on one person. Obviously, they're not doing the exact same thing. You do miss the attack up, but there are also plenty of other characters who do that. So if I wanted to use Mulhex in, say, Arena, which may not be the best use for him, he just wouldn't provide me what William provides me, with counterattacks, more basic attack damage, and AoE drop defense. And especially with this 7-turn cooldown, I mean, if this ultimate ability was amazing, I would completely understand why it's 7 turns, and I know it's built in that the cooldown is going to be lower, but the move itself, to me, isn't strong enough to even warrant my wanting to build towards it. There are just characters that are going to do the same thing much quicker. Some suggestions I've thought of to rework this character and make him more usable revolve around changing his passive. I think the idea is interesting, but unless the ultimate was strong enough, it wouldn't be worth it. So to me, if his passive was something like when an opponent attacks an ally who's affected by attack up, it'll place defense down on the attacker for 1 turn or 2 turns or something like that, so that you're really gaining a benefit. Not only are you getting the attack up, but he adds something else in terms of control and support, which is pretty much what he's supposed to be doing. I also think his ultimate could be reworked. It could be maybe less damage, lower cooldown, but then apply defense down 2 to all enemies. Or maybe it would work in a stun mechanic. There aren't many characters who stun. I don't think there even is an AoE stun in the game. So that's something you could add. But beyond that, I just don't see why I would be choosing him. And I do think that as a legendary, he should at least have certain areas where he's better than any epic. So while Mulhex isn't necessarily the worst hero, I can see, if you're free to play or if you get him in the beginning or the mid game, he can definitely provide utility. But for an account like mine, he serves absolutely no purpose. So the next hero I'm going to review is Abaddon. I've heard that he was extremely broken, and then they nerfed him, and the nerf went a little too far. Unfortunately, I wasn't playing the game when that happened, so it's impossible for me to comment on that, but I can comment on his current kit, which to me doesn't really provide the utility that you would expect out of a dark hero. Being as rare as he is to get, you can get 30 matrices of him a week in the arena shop, but he is an extremely difficult champion to get, and as a result, being dark, I think he needs to be changed to be a little bit better. So some of the things that I've noticed, and just quickly looking at his kit, it's really based around debuffs. So his ultimate is going to do huge damage and prolong any stat reduction effects on the target by 1 turn. His special ability is going to deal 120% damage to all enemies while healing, and the strength scales with the number of debuffs. And then his basic ability launches 4 random attacks, inflicting 30% damage each, and a random stat down for 2 turns. And then his passive, attacks reduce all cooldowns by 1 turn per negative effect, attacks deal bonus 5%, and then 10% when ascended. So it is interesting. The idea is he's just placing so many debuffs, and then he's sustaining himself, and then putting massive damage down on a single target with his ultimate. and I think he's a cool character. I want to use him. A lot of his abilities look really cool. The issue is, in this game, fights don't really last long enough. A lot of his abilities to me, like, I would say I would want to use them on a boss, because if he's attacking a random enemy 4 times, if only the boss is alive, then he's going to put 4 random stats on the boss, and then he's just going to do so much more damage. The issue is, because he's dark, he's not getting an affinity boost. So this 250% damage becomes less when you consider that you could choose a replacement with a positive affinity. And then just expecting him to place so many debuffs for this one big strike that's going to do a ton of damage, it just takes too long. Especially in a lot of boss content in this game, it's supposed to be quick, and we want to do speed runs, and he just isn't consistent enough. And as a dark hero, I think he should be reworked. So some of the reworks I've thought of for Abaddon would be that at least on his ultimate, he would get an extra turn if he kills somebody. That way he could kind of chain this amount of damage. So if he was to place a bunch of debuffs on someone, KO them, he'd have a chance to KO the next person, and he could kind of get on a roll, kind of similar to Zatlux. But you think if Zatlux is capable of wiping, so many people, he's so easy to build. He's purple. He's easy to get his abilities up. You only need to build him to 70% crit rate, and he's wiping waves like it's nothing. If we could make Abaddon kind of similar, just a slightly different version of that, that would be interesting to me. Another thing you could do is to grant immunity every time he gets a kill. So if he kills someone, he gets immune for 2 turns. Cirrus has that with her second ability. The amount of targets she hits gives her that many turns. I think if he were to kill someone and get 2 turns of immunity, that would also add to his abilities, because in waves, you could kill someone and then bring his immunity to the boss stage, something like that. Another thing is, because he's so dependent on debuffs, he could also steal buffs and transfer them onto teammates. That could be another thing they could work into his kit. And if they worked that into his kit, he would become immediately really good in Arena, especially for a stall team, because if they have win streaks and they're going to place attack up 2, speed up 2, and he has some mechanic that allows him to steal those and put them onto team members or put them onto himself, that would make him much more powerful. And then his special, which gives him healing, I understand the point. They want these dark lights in a lot of cases to be somewhat sustainable. For example, Brand the Brilliant gets immune upon going under 50% health. Urian gives himself the shield after his ultimate. And they want Abaddon basically to be able to heal himself and do decent damage dependent on the negative effects, giving him that heal. My issue with this is that, again, in this game, it's difficult to keep your attackers alive anyway for long enough for him to become effective. So this healing isn't really going to save him. I think if you replace the heal with maybe an AoE stun with maybe like a 50% chance to stun each target. Obviously, I'm not asking for all of these changes to be combined, because that would be pretty strong. But maybe just implementing some of these or reworking some of the abilities would help. But I think if he maybe drop defense 2 on one target, something like that. And then with the basic, I do like it, but being that it's random, it's so RNG, and considering that he's an extremely rare hero, I don't think RNG should be a main part of his kit. Granted, his abilities do scale no matter what the debuff is, but obviously there's a certain amount of debuffs that you'd prefer. So ultimately, I don't think Abaddon is a bad hero. I think he's cool. I enjoy using him. The issue is, I don't think he's good enough to be used over a lot of different heroes in specific areas, and as a result, I think he should be buffed. The last legendary that I'm going to review, who I think needs a buff, is Niklaus. Again, another light dark, and you'll see part of his kit revolves around this death immunity. Once he gets to 1 health, he gets death immunity for 2 full turns, and as soon as he triggers that, he gets his ultimate cooldown. So it's an interesting character. My issue with him is I don't really understand how you could build him in a way that would make him useful. His ultimate ability deals 100% damage, which is not a lot, and distributes 100% of his attack. At first, I thought that this was great, and it isn't bad, and I was using it to climb arena a lot. I would use him and then Windstrex, so I would ult. Windstrex would do attack up 2, speed up 2, and then I would have my 2 nukers with his attack being distributed. But I realized that as I got to the tankier teams, this just wasn't enough. And if you think about it, attack up 2 is 50%. So if someone's attack is 2, 3,000, attack up 2 is going to do way more than distributing his attack evenly. So that's one flaw. And then, again, they're trying to keep him alive at 1 health, but he doesn't really do enough damage or support for me to gain much benefit of him being alive at 1 health. The only time I found it useful is, if you had an opponent at 1 health and you just needed your character not to die, but that's so specific, and that's not something that you look for when you're picking a character. His basic ability deals 100% damage to an enemy. If the enemy's health is below 50% after the attack, grants a bonus attack on all enemies, which deals 50% damage. I actually think this ability is great. I have no problems with this. Maybe it could do a little bit more damage. And then his trait grants his character the speed of the fastest ally +1 at the start of the battle, and then if you ascend him, it's every single round. I think it's interesting, and that's kind of the reason that I thought he would be really good in Arena, because if I just make him faster than my Windstrex, and I go first, I'm guaranteed 2 turns, which before they removed 2 spells per turn would have been really helpful. As I got deeper into the ranks of Arena, it became clear that he didn't provide enough to be a consistent choice, and that because he's light dark and he's not really getting many affinity boosts, it's difficult to choose him over someone who could defeat the tanks that I know I'm going to have to face. So if I see Mythasia, I'm going to choose Garel. If I see Hakron, I'm going to choose Evira or Zatlux. It all depends. But with Niklaus, there isn't really a scenario where I'm going to plug him in, and I think Arena is probably his best use. So it's kind of difficult for me to say he doesn't need a buff because he's extremely rare. He's seemingly built for the Arena, and yet his abilities don't make him useful enough. So some basic suggestions for Niklaus would be either to just increase his overall damage. I think his basic is fine, but the ultimate doesn't do nearly enough damage. And then I would consider reworking this attack distribution. To me, if he was able to maybe add crit damage plus 20% to all team members for 1 or 2 turns, and then maybe places crit resistance down on the opponent, that could be kind of interesting. That's pretty niche, but I think any character who could increase crit damage would be good, and I don't think anybody does that yet for the whole team. Being that he's a light character and built for the Arena, I think that's something that could be viable. I don't think it would be too broken. And then in terms of his passive, I think it's kind of difficult for me to look at this and say that I really want this. Like I said in the beginning in Arena, I thought it was good that I was distributing this attack, but ultimately in this game, attack doesn't make the difference. It's going to be your crit damage and your crit rate, and whether or not you can get an attack up buff. And this is definitely weaker than Windstrex attack up, and you're also not getting the speed. So maybe the best way to balance his passive would be to grant him the speed of the fastest player on the whole field. I think maybe if it was ascended, that would be what it would be, as opposed to having at the start of the battle and then ascended would be just every round. I think maybe you could have the first trait be grants this character the speed of the fastest character on the field at the start of the battle, and then the ascension would be at the start of every round, grants this character speed of the fastest character. So it wouldn't be just the fastest ally, he would be guaranteed to be the fastest player, which I don't have Goobeg, but I'm pretty certain that's how he works. But beyond that, I do think he definitely needs a rework. He's not bad by any means, but it's difficult to find places for him other than the Arena, and then in the Arena, he's kind of underwhelming. So that's pretty much going to wrap up the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any suggestions, comments, feel free to leave them. and I will see you guys next time. Thank you.